Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and welcome to another episode of In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode normally features two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. So let's get going. This week's song is Roud 37, which is child ballad number 47. That's the song Proud Lady Margaret. This is a really fascinating song, and there's a lot to discuss. And we have a brilliant guest for this week. Just one guest though, because she's done all the research and she sings it too. Consequently, she's acting as both guests for this episode. So let's dive into my chat straight away with a brand new historical contributor, Nora Rhodes. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, Nora Rhodes. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and it's wonderful to be back.
Yeah, we had you, this is your sort of debut appearance on the podcast, but we had you on the Patreon back in, it was either January or February, wasn't it? It was a fair while
Yeah.
ago. I'm just hastily opening my spreadsheet. It was in January. We had a singer spotlight episode on one of your specialist subjects. The name escapes me.
Emma Dusenberry.
Emma Dusenberry, thank you. There we go. And yeah, so we had that one. And yeah, I was hoping we'd get you on the podcast proper at some point. And I knew that through my bits of research, going back through old Zoom recordings of meetings with the Traditional Song Forum, I noticed your name in relation to a song that was coming up this year, and we've reached it. But it seems sensible since you've done the research that you should be the one to talk about this particular ballad. But yeah, how's things? It's so we're recording this with a major time difference. It's or just gone 4 p.m. here in the UK. What are we on time wise for you at the moment in America?
It's just past 11 here.
11, right? Lovely. How's the weather over there? It's been ridiculously hot recently over here in the UK, and many of us, including me, have been sort of a bit knocked out by the heat and things. How's it been for you?
Yes, it's been quite hot here too. Even for us, it's been a heat wave. So it's been good to have air conditioning, but yes.
Yes, UK houses do not have air conditioning unless you're really rich. Uh, I'm just looking up something. So yeah, for us, the hottest we had was last. I mean, recording this on the 3rd of July. So last Monday, I think the UK, or certainly my bit of it, got to 30 degrees Celsius, which I think is about 86 Fahrenheit for you.
Yes, well,
Let's compare. What's the hottest it's been for you recently?
we've reached about we've reached over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Not quite
Oh,
sure what the Celsius.
that 95 Fahrenheit is 35 Celsius.
Yes.
Wow, even hotter than last Monday. That's yeah. Wow. Well, at least
Yeah, pretty brutal.
I've got air conditioning in my car, and I did do a lot of driving last weekend, so that was quite handy.
Yes.
But in the house, it's lots of fans, and I've got blackout blinds and thick curtains, so I've managed to keep a lot of the heat out,
Yes.
which is helpful. But
Yes. My dogs have they have long black coats, so they've not been enjoying the weather. So
oh
they
no.
find any tile floors that they can to sprawl out on.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I don't have a cat, but there's a neighborhood cat that likes to spend. It must be a stray because it basically spends because I think it probably hunts and everything at night because it spends most afternoons sleeping in my back garden, and it always moves with the shade, and so
Very
it
clever.
likes to No, it's not there at the moment, but it's yeah, it likes to it moves around the garden in the long grass wherever the shade is. So
Oh, yes.
at least my garden isn't tiled. So that's that, I suppose. But yeah, it's been really hot. And now I've closed my window in order to record this, so it's going to get hotter for me.
Mm.
But yeah, jealous of your air conditioning.
Yes.
Never mind, never mind. Um, yes, and also congratulations. You've just graduated from whatever it was you were doing. You did tell me, and I've forgotten.
Yes, I just graduated from Swarthmore College.
And where's that in relation to anything else?
It is about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia.
Nice. Well, yeah, congratulations. That's absolutely fantastic, and welcome to the world of not being able to earn enough money to do the thing we want to
Yes, thank you.
do. But yes, I'm sure you'll manage. We all do manage just about in the end, but it's an interesting life. You could
Yeah.
start a podcast, that'd be, I keep telling people to start podcasts. It's a surefire way to not earn much money.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm looking at graduate school first, which also not much in the way of earning money for the time being, but
So is
um
that like a further education sort of thing then?
yes.
Right, nice, okay. I mean, that's also one thing I was told. My parents said, stay in education for as long as possible. And I didn't. Well, I did. I finished. I got a degree from I got a university degree, but I didn't then follow on and do a PhD or a master's.
Yes.
I've got a BMus as not they're not called BMus anymore, but I've got a BMus in folk and traditional music.
Very cool.
It's from Newcastle University, but that was 13 years ago I graduated that. So
Wow.
it's yeah, it's and now I run a podcast. So anyway, let's get into this episode. So with it's just you for this episode because not only are you the person that has done a significant amount of research on this, you are also, consequently, I think one of the only people literally the only person I know of who actually sings the song as well, or at least you sang it once in front of a video camera. And I don't know whether this is one you actively sing, but you certainly have sung it once at least. Is this something that you actually have in your sort of back catalogue, your repertoire?
Yes, I've taken it to a handful of song sessions, but it's certainly a difficult one to bring out and about because of its length. So I have to be selective as to where I can bring it. But it's certainly one I always enjoy singing.
It's good to have a really epic length ballad, I think, in the brain.
Yes, and it's great fun.
It really, yes, exactly. But you've got to really, you got to pick and choose your moment and your the when and where you sing it because I've sung long ballads in rooms of people who didn't want to hear it, but I ploughed on. But yeah, you
Yes.
got to pick and choose your moment. But I don't find the length of song particularly daunting in terms of listening. It's what the song is and how it's performed. We were talking about this 2 weeks ago when we had the episode on Tam Lin and Piers Corley was my guest, and we're talking about the length of the song of that one because obviously that's a really although this one's longer, but that is also a long song. That it's you say it's I'm going to sing Tam Lin and people go oh no it's really long, but I think as long as it's as long as it's delivered by a decent singer, it shouldn't matter how long it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good story.
And the same applies for Proud Lady Margaret, and that's where we are today. Before we get into the song itself, you are, as I said, you are both history guest and sing guest this week. So the questions I normally ask are for both halves have been jumbled together, and we've come up with a good order to go through them. So, in terms of yourself as a singer, give us a bit of Nora Roud's history and your sort of did you have a musical upbringing? 'Cause I don't actually know if you play any instruments or are you just a singer. That's a question to ask.
I'm mostly just a singer, but I have spent many years playing banjo as well.
Hooray! Sorry,
Yes.
love banjos.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm I don't really come from much of a musical family. But I do come from a family of music lovers, so I did have somewhat of a musical upbringing in that respect, where it wasn't really family music making, but I grew up surrounded by music, lots and lots of CDs, and also lots of local performances, because Pittsburgh, where I grew up, is a great place for both children's music performances and also adult music performances. There's really great programs here through Chatham Baroque and through Renaissance and Baroque. So I grew up being exposed to music since, I was a baby. So it certainly set me up very well to have my own appreciation of music, and a lot of different genres as well. But from the time I was quite young, I always had a special pull towards folk music. I would listen to a lot of Peter, Paul and Mary and Pete Seeger, and I loved Joan Baez. That was really what got me started singing folk music, because I had a CD of very early Joan and it had fantastic ballads on it. And I'd grown up quite loving fairy tales. I had many books of them and I would read them over and over and over again. And so ballads were they were like the stories that I loved, but in song form. So when I was 9, I desperately wanted to learn how to sing ballads. And I was very lucky that there was a woman who lived locally who was and still is an incredible folk singer, Ellen Goshen, and she agreed to mentor me. So she would teach me folk songs. She still lives one street over, so she would come and teach me, and I just, expanded a repertoire. And when I was 11, I went to my first folk music program, which was the Augusta Heritage Center's Summer Vocal Week program. And that was really where I was exposed to not just the music that I had been singing, but also the more scholarly approach to it, because Jennifer Cutting and Steve Winnick were both there, and they're archivists at the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress. And Steve Winnick ran this absolutely amazing course on songs from the archives, where he brought in recordings from the American Folklife Center archives. And I was hooked from the very beginning. So that was what started me on the scholarly research path as well. So it took off pretty early for me, and I knew what I wanted.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I'm kind of not regretting, but I'm a little bit sad that because I've always been interested in folk music. My parents did it, and I grew up with it, and so I just learned stuff. And it was in my early teens when I started properly playing, and then a couple of years later when I started singing. And I've only become interested in. I mean, I am in no way or means a kind of scholarly writer. I just can't physically do that at all. But I'm very interested in that sort of thing and reading and researching and stuff, even though I can't really sort of put it down on paper and sort of come up with my own things. But through doing this podcast, I've become very, very interested in all that sort of thing. And I'm partly annoyed and sad that I didn't become interested in this sort of thing earlier. So I could have done the podcast. I could have been like 10 years into the podcast by now. But I guess
Yeah.
10 years ago, there wasn't the podcasts weren't a thing. And also, I did a degree in folk music, and I really should have been interested in this sort of level of stuff 17 years ago when I went to university, and then I wasn't. So, and I didn't do very well. But yeah, so it's you might as well do it now if ever. So it's good that it's happening now. But yeah, it's fantastic that you were interested in that sort of stuff from such an early age.
Yeah, well, and it certainly it guided my college career very much. I did a special major. My degree was in music, oral narrative, and social context, because at my college you could design a major if you got it approved by the relevant departments, where you could assign which courses would go towards the major, the degree, and you could have a lot of independent studies involved. So it was really good to already know exactly what I wanted to focus on and what I wanted to learn.
That's brilliant. And did you have a sort of a sort of peer group that was interested as well, or are you like some of us over here, just a sort of solitary person interested in this sort of weird, mad, nerdy stuff?
It was I was rather a solitary person in the specifics of what I was interested in. But the good thing about a small liberal arts college like what I went to is that everybody has very niche interests, and so while we all had slightly different interests, we could all sort of join together in our love of what we were studying.
That's great if you can if you can make it work like that. That's fantastic. Needs to be some sort of make nerds cool again or something. I'm trying to think of something, something like that. I don't know. Sorry, that's as close to politics as I get. Because yes, anyway, this we're not going into that at all. So, when does this, in terms of your relationship to this week's song, "Proud Lady Margaret," when did this song turn up for you, or when did you turn up to the song, and depending which way round do you want to look at it?
Yeah, well, so when I was 13, I attended the traditional music and dance program at Pinewoods in Massachusetts.
Oh, I really want to go to Pinewoods. I've heard so much about it.
It's
It's a,
incredible, so I
yeah,
would recommend it.
it sounds
Um,
so good. Yeah, yeah.
yes, I was very lucky that my mother was willing to travel all that way because it was an over 12-hour drive for us to get up there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes, but it was definitely worth it. And while I was there, I met Stephanie Smith, who was then the director of the archives of what's now the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And so she became my mentor. And my last year before college, I did an independent study with her, where we went back through some of her materials from her master's degree and PhD, which she did in Scotland. And for one of her dissertations, she focused on Lizzie Higgins. And so she went and she did a lot of interviews with Lizzie and she recorded a lot of songs from her, including Proud Lady Margaret. And so while I was working with these materials as part of the independent study, that's when I came across Lizzie singing of Proud Lady Margaret. And I mean, it's an incredible song. So it certainly spoke to me right away. As did Lizzie Higgins. You know, she had such an incredible background herself and such an incredible style. You know, I mean, she was born in Aberdeen in 1929, and of course, her parents were quite famous musicians as well, Jeannie Robertson and Donald Higgins. Um, but Lizzie had a very unique style because she loved her father's pipe music. But as a young woman at that time, it was quite frowned upon and often prohibited for women to play pipes in that community. And so when she began to develop her own style of singing, she developed what she called piping ballads, which was a way of honoring the sound of the pipe music within the songs that she was singing. So it was a way to carry on the music that she was learning from her father with, in a format that was socially acceptable for her. So this is, of course, one of her great piping ballads. And she learned quite a lot of music from her father, but this was a very special song for her that he taught her because this was a song that he had learned from his mother and her grandmother. And this was what he called his special favorite song, and he only sang it on very rare occasions. And when he taught it to Lizzie, he only taught it to her, not even to his wife, so that it could be her song very specifically and first and foremost hers.
Right, we get that sort of thing. Yeah, with certain, I've certainly found this. Some people, some listeners may correct me on this. I've certainly, through my sort of research and stuff, found that a lot of those Scots singers of the Higginses and the Robertsons and everything had this thing about, oh, that's Lizzie's song, or that's Jeannie's song. That's Stanley Robertson, who was Jeannie Robertson's nephew, therefore Lizzie Higgins' cousin. Um, they had, I wouldn't learn that because it's my Aunt Jeannie's song, etc. Everyone had, even within the family, had their own, or there were songs that I think Lizzie had learnt from Jeannie Robertson, I think, but there were certain songs that were like, that's Jeannie's song, that's Lizzie's song. And then when you get some of the southern England travellers, things like the Brazel family and the Smiths, they just learn all the song. Everyone had the same songs. There's
Yeah,
recordings of like three members of, I think it's Wiggy Smith, Denny Smith, and someone else. All three of the Brazzles, maybe it was, had the same version of the same song because they all learnt it. Whereas in
yeah.
Scotland, sometimes they were a bit more precious about who sang a song and no one else should sing that.
Yes, that's very true. And I think especially with Jeannie and Lizzie, I think because Jeannie Robertson was so famous at that point and because she was so widely known, songs that she would perform were considered Jeannie's songs. You know, they were considered first and foremost hers. And so for Lizzie to learn a song that was not taught to her mother, that was just taught to her, it did enable her to have a song that could always be just hers. Because you're right, there was very much this feel of almost like possessiveness towards the songs, not in a bad way, but in a way where it became like their version and their song. Um, so while this was really her father's version and her grandmother's version, it was her song in her generation.
That's fantastic. So, start us off properly on the song then. What's the song about? And give us a plot synopsis. I don't know how long this will take. The songs, I mean, we've got a recording of Lizzie Higgins singing it, and it's almost 15 minutes. But how dense is the plot? What is the plot of the song? Give us a rundown of what's going on.
Yes. Well, I think first, I think to be fair, the song is particularly lengthy in Lizzie's version because of the tune that she chose for it, because of the tune that she learned with it from her father, um, because it is a piping tune, and so it's very ornate and it's a fairly long tune itself. So it's more based on the tune than the words, but it is a fairly complex ballad still. There's a lot to it. It's a supernatural ballad, so it's about a visitor to the beautiful and intelligent, and as the name suggests, proud Lady Margaret. And one day, as she looks over her castle wall, she sees a knight approaching her gate, and she presumes that this knight is one of her many suitors. She's quite an eligible lady. She is, as I said, beautiful and the heir to a great fortune, and she has had suitors galore turning up at her gate. And so when he rides up and tells her that he will simply die for lack of her favor if she does not look kindly upon him, she tells him that there are many better men whose graves are already growing green for want of her love.
Right.
And
Okay.
I know exactly. And she tells him that she will give him her favor if and only if he's able to answer her three riddles, which of course is something you might recognize from last week's podcast, right?
That's right. Captain Wedderburn's courtship. It's yeah. There's that there again. Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder if that's why, because there's no rhyme or reason really to no rhyme or reason to the Roud Index. You know, in terms of why songs are in the order they are in the Roud Index. But sometimes it was a case of whatever song Steve Roud happened to come to next. But the fact that both Captain Wedderburn's courtship and this have that same kind of seduction and response is yes, but answer these riddles first thing. Maybe that's why these two songs are next to each other in the index because he happened to come across. Oh, that's got the same thing. Let's put that next. You know. So
Well, it's yes, that's possible, but it's also possible that it's because they are also consecutive numbers in the child index. So,
of course they are. Yes, I'd forgotten that because there's. I mean, what we've found so far is that so far going through the Roud Index, there is no Roud. There's no child ballad that we've come to yet that has the same child number as Roud number. Which,
yes.
but you know, the child ballads go into the Roud Index all the way through to the 4,000 mark in the Roud
Wow.
number. So there might be one that is at least until he gets around 305 because that's how many child ballads there are. But the
Yes.
closest we had was Kempy K which earlier in this season, which was Round 32 but child 33.
Ah,
That was the closest one. But then last week, it's tens. Captain Wedderburn was Round 36, child 46, and of course this is Round 37, and this is child 47. So you're
yeah.
well pointed out. They are next to each other in the child ballads as well. Because
Yeah.
just teasing next week, the two brothers, Route 38, but it's child 49. And I wonder what happened to child 48. You know,
Yes.
Steve just didn't fancy it at that time. But you're quite right, of course. So they are, but maybe that's why Child put them next to each other rather than Steve
Yeah.
Roud. It's because they had similar motif in there.
Quite likely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry, I interrupted the plot synopsis. It's a long
Yes,
plot. It's a long plot. Keep going. Keep
it
going.
is. Yes. So after she poses the three riddles to him, he's able to answer them effortlessly, quite unlike her previous suitors, I'm sure. And in some versions of the ballad, he then poses riddles in return. But in all versions, he is then revealed as her brother, who was slain across the sea and is now returning as a ghost to warn her of the peril to her soul.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. So it's yeah, fine. He's not the brother is not coming to seduce her. I was getting a bit worried for a second there. I thought this is not. This is
No,
supernatural incest. That's something completely different.
no, absolutely not.
No, fine. So his intention is different as well as the fact that he's not alive. That's
Yes.
very good to know. Very good to know.
Yes, that is an important point. It does end with him warning her of her actions and how they have doomed her soul. And a very interesting question, which we'll get to later in our discussion, is what exactly the sin which is putting her soul in peril is, because there are different answers to that.
Ah, okay. Right. And so at this point, because obviously you are both guests, so we're for this episode, so we're doing one long chat rather than two separate chats. Um, we do have the field recording of Lizzie Higgins, and as usual, at the end of our chat, I'm going to play a complete recording of you singing the song. But we haven't got an episode break in which to play a clip of Lizzie's version, and because as we'll come to later on, spoiler for in about half hour's time, the I mean, actually, there are two field recordings, but one of the only ones we're really familiar with is Lizzie Higgins. Therefore, normally I would play a shorter clip of the field recordings in order to get more recordings in. But since you've just done the plot of the song, and Lizzie Higgins is basically the only field recording, although we'll touch on something later that we both found before we started recording this. Let's hear a bit of Lizzie's version now, since you just laid out the plot, and we'll hear maybe 2 or 3 minutes of it rather than a shorter clip. So here's Proud Lady Margaret, sung by Lizzie Higgins.
It was on a night, and an evening bright, when the dew begun to fall. Lady Margaret was walking up and down, looking over the castle wall. She looked at west, she looked at east, to see what she could spy. When a gallant knight came in her sight, unto her gates through night. God make ye safe and free, fair maid. God make ye safe and free. What is your will? We miss a night. Oh, what your will we
And there we go. That's maybe a fifth of the Lizzie Higgins version. If I played 3 minutes, that's because I don't know how many minutes I'll play, but if that's 3 minutes, that's a fifth of Lizzie Higgins's version. Because that recording does last I think just shy of 15 minutes, doesn't it?
Yes.
And as you said, that's partly because of the tune and the melody and I guess the way it's sung. The time she takes over it's not something you want to gabble through. She really does take her time over every word, doesn't she?
Yes, and I think very intentionally because it was such a special song to her, and she talks about how much care she would take in singing it, and she would only sing it when she was certain that she could give it her all.
Ah, fair play, fair play. I mean, I've touched on this already, mentioning field recordings or lack thereof. But a question I always ask: this was this a particularly popular and widespread song, or how common was it? Did it go international? And all that sort of questions. I guess the answer's no, pretty much to all of those.
Yes, unfortunately, the answer is no. I do think it's a song which certainly deserved much more popularity than it has ever had, but or at least has ever had in the times at which songs were being documented, right? Because we can't know how much more popular it could have been centuries ago, or centuries and centuries ago. Um, but there are only really six known versions that have been documented, five of which appear in Child, and then, of course, Lizzie's version as well, which was documented more recently, but has, of course, quite an old history in the Traveller tradition and in her family itself.
And in terms of, we'll come on to the field recordings later, although we've heard one of them already. Um, it doesn't, yeah. So basically, you've said, yeah, five in Child and Lizzie Higgins, and possibly something else later on. We'll come to. Um, it seems to just be Scotland in terms of its locale. It hasn't. There's nothing from anywhere else.
Yes, exactly.
Although I'm sure Child, I haven't read Child's sort of blurb for this. I'm sure he attempts to link it to Denmark or somewhere. He usually did attempt that, but whether or not we believe the ideas, but it's interesting to think about that. So we have the recording of Lizzie Higgins, which we've heard, and that was made in the 1970s. So rather than saying how far back can we trace this song, which out of the five versions in Child is the oldest?
Well, Child version A is the oldest. That was taken from Sir Walter Scott's Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, which, of course, was first published in 1803. So this version must be older than that. And the version included in Scott's publication was sent to Scott from a Mr. Hamilton of Edinburgh.
Oh yes, that's right. I've just opened my copy of Child briefly, and by Mr. Hamilton, a music seller from Edinburgh, with whose mother it has been a favourite. So yeah, so I mean that's very sort of tangential. That's not hard evidence of it being sung earlier than 1803, but someone said it was. So it's very possible that it goes back further than 1803, but the evidence we have 1803.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got the five versions in Child. Then take us through, and that and Lizzie's version, I guess. Take us through, because normally I would ask how has the song developed over the years, the hundreds of years from the earliest known variant to sort of the field recording era. But all we've got are the five ones in Child and Lizzie Higgins. So how are they all relatively similar? I know that there's one version that has a different title. When people sing it now, has a different title. But do they all differ significantly? These versions, or are they all relatively kind of a similar structure with minor variants, or a couple of them like really significantly different?
Well, they all have the same foundation and they have the same basic plot, but there are some fairly major differences in some of them. The first few are pretty similar. The one that was sent to Scott, Scott actually altered a bit. He added two verses at two separate points in the ballad, which he assumed were missing from the narrative. Although, looking at the other versions that we have, it becomes pretty clear that they likely luckily there were no verses missing. And it's
Ah,
just,
okay.
a misguided attempt to complete the ballad. Um, but Child's B version was taken from Peter Buchan's Ballads of the North of Scotland and published in 1828. And this version was called the Courteous Knight. It's a version that is most similar to the one that Lizzie sings, and it includes some of the unusual elements that are present in her version. But it's also by far the longest version. In Child, it's almost twice as long as almost all of the other versions, which seems surprising until you discover that the version is actually a composite of three different sources that Child kind of put together. It's somewhat of an amalgamation of Buchan's version and a version from William Motherwell's manuscript, and then, of course, Child A from Scott's Minstrelsy. So,
Right, sure. I was just thinking because it's interesting that that's a later version. Obviously, it's only about 20 years later, almost.
mhm.
But the Courteous Knight
Yeah,
certainly has the ring of it being an older variant because those kind of titles tend to be the oldest ones. When you get broadside ballads, they tend to have titles like The Undaunted Female or the story of how the young woman went off to sea and slew the men she didn't like and blah, 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 blah. And
yes,
so the Courteous Knight has a more of a ring to it of an older song than Proud Lady Margaret
yes,
because I don't think had unless it was deliberately based on a real person. Those kind of older broadside ballads didn't really use first names. I think they're more descriptive things. So the Courteous Knight certainly sounds. And as I was looking at the other titles, the Jolly Hind Squire, you're going to come to in a minute, and the Knight of Ackerdale, these are titles that sound older at least than Proud Lady Margaret, which sounds like a more modern title, except we've got an 1803 one. So my
yes.
argument kind of falls down there, but nevertheless, you get the point anyway.
Yeah, well, it is interesting to see the different titles. And I think it's certainly interesting also that in a song that is very clearly about Margaret, there are these versions where the title does focus on the slightly more minor male character involved. Um,
That comes up a lot in folk song on the
yes, it does.
Patreon. On the Patreon, we had my duo partner George Sanson came on for a 3 episode Singers Choice thing, and we talked about the song Lovely Joan,
Yeah.
and that kind of is about Lovely Joan. It is about the character of Joan, but there are some versions of the plot of Lovely Joan. We're off topic here, but the plot of Lovely Joan does turn up in other songs we've covered on the podcast. On the Patreon, a song called "Rolling in the Dew" or "Dabbling in the Dew," and a song we did in season 2 of the main podcast called "Clear Away the Morning Dew" or the Baffled Night. I think it was. My brain's kind of go back through the podcast episodes, and interestingly, it's all about the man sort of trying to seduce the woman, and she gets away. Except sometimes the song is called Lovely Joan, and sometimes it's the Baffled Night. It's whether the focus of the song is the man that failed to get his way, or the woman who managed to get away from the person she didn't like, a woman who got her way, got her way over the annoying man. And so, yeah, it depending on who you want the focus of the song to be, I guess
Yeah.
is how it can be titled. But it's interesting that we've got Pride and Margaret, and we have the Courteous Knight, the Knight of so and so.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah. Sorry, I butted in again. Continue from wherever you were.
Yeah, well, version C is also from Buchan's collecting from his unpublished manuscripts, but this one doesn't really have any unique elements in comparison to version A and B. Everything in it is also contained in A and or B. Child D, on the other hand, is that's the one that was collected from the manuscripts of Jane and Amelia Harris in the 1850s. And Jane and Amelia Harris were transcribing songs primarily from their family tradition in up in Perthshire. And this version is quite different in that not only does the Revenant brother pose no riddles, which he does in A through C, but the riddles which Margaret poses are the ones which in versions A through C the brother himself would ask. So this is the only time that that a version has Margaret asking those particular riddles, and it's likely a bit of a confusion in how the um in how the version was preserved.
Right, sure, yeah. Um, yes, I was. We'll come back to the Harris from Mrs. Harris later on. I'm sure. I was just looking at. I just made a note of it. We'll do a little ranking here of length of songs. In last place, we have version E in Child, the which is the whichever one that is. Not 1899 is that
Yes,
1829.
1829, I believe.
Beg your pardon. Yeah.
Yes, by Alex Lang.
Right, and so that's 12 verses. So that's in last place.
Yes.
And then then version D from Mrs. Harris, that's 15 verses.
Mhm.
When in third place, we go back to version A for 19 verses for the Scots Minstrelsy one from Mr. Hamilton. And then version C, which is the Buchan manuscript, 21. Although there are the dots between stanzas 10 and 11, which implies there were more there. So 21 at least, which brings us in first place, as you said, more than double the version B, but that's a composite of three versions,
Mhm.
brings us to 32.
Yes.
But then there are dots between verses 16 and 17, so it could be even longer, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah,
But
well, what's interesting about Child E, the shortest one, is that it is actually the most different, and it appears to have had perhaps intentional alterations made to it. Um, it comes from Alex Lang's manuscript, Ancient Ballads and Songs, his unpublished manuscript, and he claims that he got it from the recitations of old people. Uh,
that's a very helpful description, isn't it? It's like, yeah, not no names or ages, just from the recitation of old people. Yeah.
yes.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. But this one doesn't have any riddles. It's the only version that has no riddles. And it's also a very clear morality tale in how it has been written. The last couple verses, as you might notice, have Margaret repenting, quite ill with remorse. So that's a very different ending from how it usually goes.
Yeah, I just noticed because that's the other version out of the five child ones that actually has Margaret in the title.
Yes.
Because there's Proud Lady Margaret is the first one, but this one's Fair Margaret. And yeah, so we've got the five versions in Child, and then so do you know? I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot here or not, but or whether I asked this and you've already answered it. Which out of the five versions in Child is Lizzie Higgins' version the closest to?
Yes. It's closest to version B from Child. Which
Right.
makes sense because that one is quite long and has so many elements that it makes sense that it would contain a lot of the unique elements that Lizzie also has.
Sure. And how many verses does Lizzie's version have? No one ever knows this about their own songs. I really should sort of ask this in advance. It's because it's not the sort of thing you think about as a singer, is it? Because you sing this song, so it's not the sort of thing you'd ever think about. About what do pick a song I sing and how many verses? I don't know, 7, 12. I don't know. I don't understand.
That's a good question. Uh,
So okay, so you're having a quick look now.
I believe there are 8 verses, but they're very long. So they're because of the tune, it's kind of double verses. So it would actually be 16.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of 16 stanzas, but they're made up into 8 verses. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm gradually getting used to stanzas and verses are not the same thing. Nice, yeah, because the next child ballad in the ballad, which is the one that Steve missed out, uh, I realised as I was looking for stuff, is actually one that I sing, which is the death of young Andrew, and that's yeah, depending on how you look at it, it's either 22 verses or it's, oh no, 22 stanzas, but 11 verses, depending because the way the tune differs in each half. So yeah, that's that sort of thing. And so version B and 8, but could be 16. But even if it's 16, that's half the length of version B.
It is, yes.
Exactly half, in fact.
Yes. Yes, which
But
is
yes.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot. So would there be quite a lot of plot missing from Lizzie's version compared to version B in Child, or is it just things are condensed, or and there are less descriptive passages? And what are the sort of how does it differ?
Yeah, I would say it certainly doesn't really leave anything out in terms of the plot, but I think it is more focused, perhaps,
Hmm,
which also makes sense for a comprehensive version rather than something that's kind of been put together from separate versions, which might be a little bit more rambling, as I think is potentially the case with Child B. But so with
sure.
Lizzie's version, there are two complete recordings of her singing of Proud Lady Margaret, one of which, of course, you played some of earlier, which is the one that was made by Peter Hall in the 1970s. The other version was recorded by Stephanie Smith, as I mentioned earlier, in 1973, which is the version that I've learned, which is a little bit shorter than the Peter Hall version, only by a few lines. It's a little bit altered.
Okay.
Um, but it it does omit her version does omit a few of the verses and storylines found among Child's first three versions. The lengthiest difference and a big part of what accounts for that distinction in length is that Lizzie's version does not include any riddles returned by the Revenant brother. The only person who speaks and answers riddles, it's always Margaret posing and her brother answering in Lizzie's version. Um, there are also some other smaller details that are left out. Like her accusation of the knight appearing as a false young man, his flattery of her, and also the lady's boast, Lady Margaret's boast of her massive inheritance, and the knight's descriptions of Margaret's outward pride. But of course, the foundational narrative remains the same in Lizzie's version. And Lizzie also includes quite unusual elements in her own version. Most interestingly, as we will discuss later, a warning of Margaret's imminent descent to Prairie's chair in hell, something that's only shared by version B.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll come to some of the riddles and the motifs and things in a few minutes. I just want to quickly go through because yeah, we got five versions in Child, but we have if we go into Bronson, the tunes of the Child ballads, there are three melodies for this. We've got one which is the Harris one, the Knight of Acadale, the Harris music manuscript, and then we've got two Proud Lady Margarets. I'm going to do my usual thing of attempting to sight sing them with no prior practice whatsoever. So we've got the first one, which is the Knight of Acadale, the Harris manuscript music. So that will be which version in Child was that again? That was
D.
D. That's version D in Child. There came a knight to Acadale. His steed was Winder small, and there he spied a lady bright, looking o'er the castle wall. Yes, that's quite a nice compact
Yes.
melody. Thank you. Um, and yeah, that sort of it does the job, and it's quite small. And the second one is in Christie manuscript, 1876. The text is after Scott's Minstrelsy 3, but Christie says the Aberdeenshire tradition followed Buchan's Ancient Ballads and Songs 1822, the Courteous Knight, or Jolly Janet. Where Jolly Janets come from, but anyway. Um, da da ya da dum dum da da ya da da dum bum bum ba da 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 dum da da ya da dum bum ba dum da bum ba da da ends on the third of the scale. Da dum. So that would go something like. 'Twas on a night and an evening bright, when the dew began to fall. Lady Margaret was a walking up and down, and looking over the castle wall. Something like that. That was a bit ropey on my part, but there was some of that in there. The second one, and the third one's in Proud Lady Margaret. It's the Grieg manuscript one, sung by Mrs. Gordon, New Deer in Aberdeenshire. G minor, I think, if this is what it's written out in. And this is. I think that I'll come to this version again in the modern field recordings thing. I think I found it. Bum 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 ba da 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 ba dum ba da da dum bum ba. That's when you're ganging at yon church door with the yellow gold on your hair, it's ye care more for your wheel red locks than you do for morning prayer. That's a weird and fantastic melody.
Yes.
And so I will come back to that one later if I remember. Anyway, so those are the three melodies that Bronson has provided
Yeah.
for some older ones anyway. So that's my bit of singing over with for the time being. So then, yeah, what do we have in terms of? We had this last week with Captain Wedderburn. What are the riddles in Proud Lady Margaret?
Yes. Well, so there's actually two very important elements to this, and to the positioning of the riddles, which is both the riddles and the revenant. So just to speak to the theme of the revenant first, um, it's a very traditional concept in ballads to have a revenant, and it is, of course, a defining element of all versions of Proud Lady Margaret. And a revenant is most commonly somebody with either a familial or a romantic relationship to whoever it is they're visiting. And usually the purpose of this visitation, right, the purpose of the revenant within the story is either to redress a wrong or to avenge it. So it's always having to do with some perceived sin, some perceived ill. So in this case, it is, to right a wrong, right? He's not there for revenge. He's there to try and sort of course correct Margaret. And in that case, usually the revenant is there to right a wrong that was caused by his own death. So there's kind of two possibilities here. There's a third that we will come to later, but there's kind of two possibilities if her sin is pride, for how his death could have caused this. The first being that when he died overseas, when he died in the war, he left her as the sole heir to their parents' estate, which in most versions is actually discussed as incredibly massive, right? Child A through C talks about 12 castles being left to her, and Lizzie herself lists 9 castles. So certainly this would be enough to go to anybody's head, right? This could make anybody prideful. And another possibility is that when he died, he would have left her with a much less protection than she would have had having her older brother there, both in terms of protection from suitors with false intentions, because now she is the heir to such a great estate, but also just with less protection in terms of the physical protection that an older brother could provide. So this could lead to her sin of pride and turning away all the suitors sort of as a defense mechanism instead. So this is another element of how this could have played out to necessitate this revenant within the story. But of course, the other and related foundational element of the story is the deployment of riddles. And there's been a lot of scholarship about riddles, and there's been some scholarship about riddles particularly pertaining to this ballad. So David Atkinson wrote an excellent article in the 90s about the Unquiet Grave and Proud Lady Margaret, focusing on wit combats or riddles and revenants in tandem within the stories. So riddles appear in both secular ballads like Captain Wedderburn's Courtship and supernatural ballads. like this one. And in supernatural ballads, they're common because wit combats or riddles are kind of a way to bridge the gap between mortal and immortal, between living and dead, or between human and supernatural, as is seen most commonly in ballads about the devil, right, where the devil is usually posing riddles. Um, and in secular ballads, again, seen last week with Captain Wedderburn's courtship, a wit combat is usually intended to judge suitability in courtship, which is also happening here. So what makes this ballad particularly fascinating in looking at both riddles and revenants is that it's extremely uncommon for a ballad to have both supernatural and secular riddle forms combined. Where there is the supernatural form of a immortal and an immortal exchanging riddles, but also the secular form of the riddles being intended for courtship. So that is one thing that makes this a particularly incredible ballad. And beyond that, it is, as far as I'm aware, completely unique in that the riddles go in the opposite direction from what one would expect from a supernatural ballad, where it is in fact Margaret and not the Revenant who is the poser of the riddles. So, I mean, if
Okay.
anybody listening is aware of any ballads in which that happens, I'd love to hear about it. But in my research, I have not been able to find something in which that's the case.
Right, sure. And so, yeah, what are the riddles in this case then? What are some of the questions posed?
Yes, well, there is actually some significance to the questions and answers, as usual, but there's some significance where it fits quite well in this story. So the questions that Margaret asks are first, what is the first flower that grows on Mirandel? Second, what is the bonniest bird that sings next the nightingale? And third, what is the bonniest color that king or queen can wear? And the answers in order are the primrose, the mavis, and yellow gold, right? And for the first riddle, having the answer be the primrose is quite good, not only in that it is, of course, factually correct, right? Primrose with primus meaning first, because it is in fact the first flower. But it's also a flower which is usually associated with womanhood and with young love. And in flower language, it's a flower that can be translated to "I can't live without you," which is, of course, quite apt for a ballad in which Margaret's suitors keep dying for love. Um, and beyond that, the saying to walk down the primrose path is a saying meaning to follow a life of indulgence, which for a ballad entitled Proud Lady Margaret, and for one where she does seem to be quite living, a life of indulgence with her parents, inheritance and her countless suitors and her great beauty and wit, it's also, rather fitting. So that's a very interesting answer. But beyond that, something that I found very interesting in my research is why, with questions and answers that seem fairly straightforward, why so many suitors were unable to answer these questions and why her brother was able to so easily answer that. And this is where a piece of history local to where Lizzie says the ballad originates is quite interesting, because Lizzie claims that it's a ballad set in Northumberland, which of course had a very long history of war, a very long history of siege and of fighting in the border wars and everything. And riddles could often be used as password riddles in this time, where they were guessable in significant degree, but to have the exact right answer, to have the correct answer, you had to be familiar with the question and answer expected. So, for example, in Northumberland in the 13th century, when there were Scottish soldiers attacking, there was a password where the word tabard had to be answered with "over the tunic," which makes sense since the tabard is in fact worn over the tunic. But you really do have to have a certain amount of foreknowledge. You have to be familiar with the answer to know exactly what to say in response. So it's possible that these questions were some form of identity test in that way, that these were in fact password riddles, which is why it was hard to guess. And indeed, because we don't, of course, see any successful local shooters, it's quite possible, as Lizzie says, that it was more narrow still, and it was what Lizzie calls a secret family motto, known only to family people, and therefore Margaret's brother would have been aware of the questions and answers, but none of the other suitors would be. So that's one possibility for what's going on with the riddles.
Right, yeah, that's great because yeah, in some because you get some songs like uh last season or was it 2 seasons ago on the podcast, the Elfin Knight, which became Scarborough Fair, that people know now, really. They are the sort of the impossible riddles, aren't they? Those ones.
Yes.
It's build me a dry this wash this shirt in a well that has no water or and dry it on a thorn and stuff. And then yeah, and then Captain Wedderburn's courtship last week was impossible riddles that are possible in a way, like cherry without a stone, a bird without an egg,
Mhm.
or whatever. Yeah, whatever it is. And we found myself and Barbara Snape. She was the singing guest last week, and we were looking through some versions of it and found one riddle about name me a priest unborn,
Mm.
and the idea and normally that is unsolvable and therefore the person in the story doesn't get their way. But we did find one Irish version that mentioned a priest that was in the Bible that does, appears to be a fictional priest from the Bible, and therefore it's a priest unborn because it was a priest that wasn't born. So impossibles that are possible, but in this one, yeah, it's more identity tests and things, and that's fascinating that those kind of the way that the different riddles are. Yeah, and I said right at the beginning of this chat, I became aware of your sort of link to this song through stumbling across. I was going through the traditional song forum and their back catalogue of because they do meet in person. They have conferences a handful of times a year, but they do a monthly Zoom chat. We have a monthly Zoom meeting rather, and people present papers, articles, research there. And if you go onto their YouTube page, their YouTube channel, all of the Zoom meetings have been recorded and they're all there. And I noticed I was going through it to find out who's done research on particular songs and can I use them on the podcast. And there you were, which I was surprised about because I just hadn't realised that you had done the research on this because we do know each other a little bit. We've sort of met a couple of times in person on a couple of your UK visits. Which I think the last one was almost 10 years ago, maybe. Or no, not 10 years ago, but it was 2015, I think. When was that? The Women in the Folk Conference?
That was 28.
2018, was it? Oh, that shows you how badly my memory is. Conference on Women in the Folk, which was held at the University of Sussex. And yeah, so I saw you there. That was the last time we saw each other in person. But yeah, so your name came up on the list of stuff there, and then I reached out to you, and then you sent me the actual paper that you wrote, which I managed to skim read very quickly this morning in my minute of free time. But so yeah, how did it become like a proper bit of research for you, this song?
Yes, well, so this kind of brings us to my favorite part of researching this ballad, which is the kind of big overarching question of what is Margaret's sin, right? What is it that has doomed her soul to hell? Um,
Yeah,
because this is slightly contested, um, and it's a fascinating question. So the standard interpretation of this ballad, the standard modern interpretation, is as one of a beautiful lady's pride, right? Largely guided by the title of the song, and all versions contain some form of an accusation of Margaret's wrongful pride. However, there's very little. Sorry. Um,
there's, there's a dog wandering around in the background.
yes, that's
A,
Glorfindel.
a very good name for a dog.
Thank
That's
you.
fantastic. Anyway,
Um, yeah, so there's very little evidence of actual sinful pride occurring in the ballad. We're told that Margaret is beautiful, but that's not a crime. And We're
No, indeed not. Indeed not.
Yes, and we're told that she wears fine clothing, but it's really just clothes befitting her status. And she tests her suitors, but there's really nothing wrong with that either because their inability to answer her riddles isn't really her fault. And she has every right to wish for a safe and happy marriage. So, but barring the blatant morality tale that is child version E, there's very little to suggest any pride that is actually so serious as it would doom her soul to hell. So all we have is the title of the song, and then her brother claiming that she has some grave sin that has made her unclean and made her fated for hell if she doesn't change her ways. So this, of course, raises a question, which is what's actually going on here, right? And Lizzie Higgins has a very interesting answer, which is she claims that this is a song that is about witchcraft. It's about black magic. And Margaret's true crime is not pride, but her use of black magic. And furthermore, that her brother, who's now a revenant, was himself a warlock and was, as Lizzie says, high up in the black craft. He's come to advise her and save her from the same fate into which he himself has fallen. Um, so, through my research, I did find several elements of the ballad which do seem to strongly support this theory and the plausibility of this interpretation, often in versions independent from Lizzie's itself. So the first is the positioning of riddles, as we talked about earlier, how it's very uncommon in fact, it's kind of unheard of in supernatural ballads for it to be the human versus the supernatural being who's posing the riddles. But this would be explained if Margaret is dabbling in the dark arts, right? If she herself is a witch, I suppose, or if she is involved in witchcraft, this would explain her as the riddle poser. And secondly, if the brother has returned as a revenant to put to rights something which his death caused, it could very well be a wrong that was caused by his own involvement with black magic, which would have then influenced her to join it herself, which is why he is the one who sent her to put this to rights. Um, Third, and to me, I think most intriguing, is the rather mysterious and inexplicable death of all of her previous suitors, which, could of course be from a broken heart, all of them, dotting the hillside, right? Their graves are green now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
However, as David Atkinson talks about in his paper on wit combats, in many supernatural ballads, the inability to provide the correct response to the riddles does indeed result in death. So this would explain why this is happening, why all of her suitors are met with this rather extreme fate for failing to answer these questions.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, Brian Peters mentioned this back in the Elfin Knight history we did in season two. He said, you know, for all, regardless, of what people may think of Monty Python and the films and how funny they are, you can't deny that they did their research. And and even when you get to I always think of the riddles in the Holy Grail. Answer me the
Yes.
questions three. What is your name? What is your favorite color? What is the average velocity of an unladen swallow? What is the capital of Assyria? And all that sort of stuff. And if they don't answer them correctly, they die. They get chucked over the ravine. And so, the Python team did their research when it came to setting things in the right historical period and getting that sort of thing right. So, yeah, that's definitely a thing. Is it a death if you don't answer the riddles properly? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I will say, I had not made the connection to Monty Python, but I think that is certainly a valid point. Yes, it does come from the same tradition.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, well, another element related to that, which makes it interesting to consider this, and makes it, it's a very it makes a lot of sense to consider witchcraft as what's actually going on here. In terms of when Margaret's brother warns her of hell, in multiple versions, he does so as somebody who is speaking to her from that place, somebody who has been there. He says, like, if you had been where I have been, you will repent it sore. And So that of course raises a big question as to why a noble knight from an honorable family who, died fighting for his country in Dunfermline would be in hell, right? And
Yeah, of
of
course.
course, if he himself had been practicing black magic and, in the same way as her soul is now doomed, his soul was already doomed, that does quite easily answer that question.
Of course, yeah. How would he know why would he be in hell if he was good? Or yeah, he might have been good, but then he would have been put there by someone else. Yeah, anyway, yeah, that's not something I'd considered at all before.
Yeah.
But yeah, fascinating. That's really interesting.
Yeah, well, there's kind of one final like more overarching connection which I made in my research, which I think is a very interesting argument for why the idea of magic here fits so well, which is that as I know I mentioned earlier, I grew up reading a lot of fairy tales and folk tales, right? I read them quite voraciously. I was obsessed, and so when I was studying Proud Lady Margaret. I realized that I recognized the plot line, I recognized the story. And when I tracked down what it reminded me of, it was Hans Christian Andersen's The Traveling Companion. Um, and so that's a story which bears quite a striking resemblance to the plot of Proud Lady Margaret, as it's a tale that includes a revenant, a wit combat, a beautiful noblewoman, her many ill-fated suitors, and of course, witchcraft. So the premise is again a proud lady who refuses to accept a suitor unless he can pass her riddle tests. And in The Traveling Companion, she asks these riddles under the influence of a wicked wizard, and the riddles are quite unanswerable. She'll ask things like, "What am I thinking of?" Things that you can't really come up with an answer
Yeah,
to. And the penalty for inability to answer these is execution. And there are many dead suitors growing, in her garden, buried in her garden. Um, but then in the story, the protagonist, Johannes, who is accompanied by a traveling companion for whom the story is named, arrives and is quite besotted with this lady. But each night, the princess, the lady in question, turns into a bird and she flies to the evil wizard who is controlling her and assigning her riddles. But because Johannes has this traveling companion, who's later revealed to be a revenant, he is able, through his own magic, to follow her and to hear the riddles that she's told to pose to her suitors. And in so doing, he's able to give Johannes the answers to the riddles, which is able to help break the curse. And so ultimately, Johannes is able to defeat and slay the wizard and help to restore the princess to herself, and therefore save, both her and her soul. So, of course, there are very clear crossovers between these two stories, and they both share storylines and elements of much older tradition, and elements that have been carried on more recently, like in Puccini's Turandot, which is based on the same themes, or in Wagner's last completed opera, Parsifal, which also shares elements and motifs. So this was fascinating to learn about and to look into. The Traveling Companion is an ancient. It's adapted from an ancient Danish folk tale. Speaking of child connecting everything back to Denmark. But
yeah,
I mean, for good reason, because there is, of course, such a connection. It's a Danish folk tale with Norwegian origins. And of course, there's so much crossover there with Scotland because of travel and because of, migration. And so it makes sense that this is a story that could have been adapted into a ballad, that these are based on the same older Norse myths. So I don't know, that was one of my favorite things to discover in my research. And it all kind of comes together in looking at, as I mentioned earlier, this verse in Lizzie's version that is also shared in Bachen's version B in Child, which is the verse about Prairie's chair. Because in the scholarship on Proud Lady Margaret, nobody's really touched on what Prairie's chair could mean other than sort of an assumption that it must be where you go if you are prideful. But there isn't really any linguistic connection between prairie and pride, despite the similar sound. However, what I found digging a little bit deeper is that in Persian and other older folk mythology, the peri, which is spelled the same as Prairie's chair, is a beautiful supernatural woman who's capable of magic and often associated with casting love spells, and often, as in the traveling companion, is winged or is capable of transforming into a bird, which of course connects it to much stronger myths of the Swan Maiden and things like that. And so this is a creature, a supernatural being who is morally ambivalent or mischievous and is denied entrance to paradise until they have atoned, which of course is very similar to what's going on here. So it all kind of connects in a very interesting way.
Yeah, so I think we can move on to what would normally be with some of these songs quite an extensive recommended listening list. On the field recording side, apart from one, which we'll mention briefly, all there is really, as far as we can tell, is Lizzie Higgins. Is there anything? I mean, we've mentioned obviously she's been quite the subject of this conversation. Is there anything else, particularly about the recording of her singing it, that you would like to mention while we're here now?
Not very much about the recording of the song itself, although I will say that if anybody is interested in hearing what Lizzie has to say about the song and about her singing of it, on Kiss to Riches, there are some fantastic recordings that Stephanie Smith did when she was interviewing Lizzie, where Lizzie talks about her version of Proud Lady Margaret and what it means to her and to her family, and also, of course, this whole question of witchcraft. So that's quite worth listening to if you're interested in hearing from Lizzie.
Great. I'll try and find that page and or the one of those pages, and I'll try and put a link to it if I can find it. That's fine. And yeah, that recording, at least one of the recordings of her singing this, is a 1970s recording by Peter Hall. It doesn't get any more specific than in the 1970s, which is spectacularly unhelpful. But that recording is available to buy from the Musical Traditions label. You can buy the download of it now. It's a CD called In Memory of Lizzie Higgins, and I have my own copy here somewhere, and it's 2 discs, one with 16 tracks, one with 18 tracks. So it's a pretty decent amount of songs there. And we've had Lizzie Higgins on the podcast already because we've had other songs. We had the songs that she has sung have turned up already. We've had things like, well, Three Gypsies, there you go, Proud Lady Margaret, The College Boy, that was The Trees That Took Her High, or The Twa Brothers, that's next week's song. She's had a lot of these, and The Cruel Mother as well, and something else I think as well. But yeah, so In Memory of Lizzie Higgins is the name of the 2-disc CD, and you can still buy the digital download of that from the Musical Traditions site, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. However, as we were preparing to press record on this chat, I was scanning through the Kiss to Riches site. I just literally typed in Proud Lady Margaret into the search, and lots of things come up. Obviously, lots of unrelated things related to the fact that other songs have the name Margaret in it and things and whatever. However, we came across a recording of Stanley Robertson, Lizzie's cousin. Stanley was nephew of Jeannie Robertson. And it's a 1982, February 1982, the 13th of February, 1982, recording by Barbara McDermott. And I basically didn't have a chance to listen to this. I sent you the link. Did you manage to have a quick listen to some of it before we started?
No.
No. Okay, that's fine. So neither of us have listened to this, but it's there, and the notes, the item notes on the page do say that it is definitely Roud 37, Child 47, Proud Lady Margaret. Several features of this ballad, it says, are found in Stanley Robertson's story, including the visitation by a suitor and the theme of sinful pride by the heroine's undoing. And the title given, it's not really a title, it's like a line of the plot, essentially. Lady Margaret was punished for her pride when her dead lover, dot, dot, dot. And so, yeah, neither of us have listened to this, but it appears to be Proud Lady Margaret. And that's interesting because I think anyone who has looked at this song pretty much just goes to Lizzie Higgins. And I think, yeah, neither of us were aware of Stanley Robertson recording this song, but it's there. So I will take a listen, and I will definitely put a link to that in the show notes as well. But yes, neither of us are aware of that, but we may have to listen to that at some point and think about it.
It does sound like it ends very differently from Lizzie's version, because it does sound like in Stanley Robertson's version, Lady Margaret ends up in hell by the end of it, which is, of course, a rather important difference from, in fact, any of the versions.
Yes, indeed, which makes you wonder. So, yeah, we know that Lizzie Higgins learned it from her dad, and that was very specific, him teaching it to her, and not Jeannie Robertson's not in the picture for that version. But then the notes we've got of the recording, I think it does say that Stanley Robertson introduces a story. So maybe this is a story rather than a song. Maybe he's telling this as a story. Because any time this song is mentioned in relation to Stanley Robertson in these notes on the page, it refers to it as a story separately from the Ballad of Proud Lady Margaret. So maybe this is Stanley telling the story of it. It says Stanley introduces a story that he learnt from old Maggie Stewart, who called it Proud Lady Margaret. And there's a bit of a plot, and then it says Stanley comments on the possible relationship of the story to the ballad of the same name. So there's obviously a close connection. And then the item is the ballad referred to here is Proud Lady Margaret. And so her features are found in Stanley's story. So it'd be interesting to hear more about the provenance of that one from Stanley and then Maggie Stewart and see. But it seems like it's, regardless of what I just said 2 minutes ago, it seems like it's Stanley Robertson telling this as a story rather than singing as a ballad. So that's interesting. If anyone wants to look into that, they're very welcome. But that really is all there is in field recordings wise, isn't it? There's just nothing else. Either only Lizzie had it and her dad and whatever, or it was never collected from anyone else. People had it, but it was never collected. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Because that's all we can go by. And we're not doing much better on the modern side either, on the revival, the folk revival side. According to our good friend Mainly Norfolk, brilliant website by Reinhardt, we've got 3. There are 4 entries, and one of them is Lizzie Higgins. So get rid of that one. We've got 3. And if we go chronologically, we've got a 1964 album by Folkways on the Folkways label, which is Ewan MacColl's album, The English and Scottish Popular Ballads, Volume 2. And there it is, second to last track on there, Proud Lady Margaret. And I'm not entirely sure which learned from Greg and Keith, so I think there's bits of different versions in that one. Ewan MacColl singing, but it's, regardless of one's opinion on Ewan MacColl, it's always worth listening to what he has to say and sing, I think.
Yes.
And then 1975, Pete and Chris Coe. Pete's still with us. In fact, haven't told anyone this. I'm interviewing him soon for a bonus podcast episode because he's doing something that I'm going to interview him for. Chris passed away 2-3 years ago. Very sad loss to us all. And their duo from the 70s, it's on their second album called Out of Season, Out of Rhyme. And it's in the middle of side 2 of the LP. And it's called Proud Lady Margaret. And I'll come back to this in Bronson. The melody that Chris Coe sings is the 3rd version in Bronson. The when ye gang it on yon church door with a gold and yellow gold on your hair. That one. That was a very bad attempt to sing it just now. But that's the Mrs. Gordon from New Deer in Aberdeenshire. Also in the Greg manuscript. So the melody is there. for that one, but I don't know where maybe Chris sort of patched the words together from some of the other child versions of that, but certainly she uses the third melody that's in Bronson of that. So that's on their 1979 trailer album, Out of Season, Out of Rhyme. And then we move swiftly into the 2000s and 2004, the only, apart from Your Good Self, the only recording of this song that certainly many Norfolks aware of is Catherine Campbell. And we mentioned Catherine Campbell last week because it's the same album. And this is one of the versions in Child, wasn't it? The Mrs. Harris.
That's version D.
Version D in Child. And there's a book, the song repertoire, I mean, I said this last week, the song repertoire of Amelia and Jane Harris, edited by Emily Lyle, 2002. And in 2004, Catherine Campbell did a whole CD called The Songs of Amelia and Jane Harris. And on there is Captain Wedderburn. And also The Cruel Brother, a few weeks last season. And the Cruel Mother's there as well. And lots of things. But then track 4, The Night of Acadale. And that's the one version D in Child. And yeah, so I'd love to. I still haven't got my hands on a copy of that CD. I really need to, and the book, of course, for my already overflowing shelves.
Yeah.
But yes, but that really is it. You know, on the field recording side, it's Lizzie Higgins, and that story told by Stanley Robertson. On the revival side, there's Ewan MacColl, Pete and Chris Coe, and Catherine Campbell, and that appears to be it. And Nora Rhodes, as we're going to hear at the end of this. At the end of this chat. So, yeah, I think I'll put links to those that I can find in the episode notes, as usual, in the show notes. And I think we'll draw this to a close there. That's been absolutely fascinating to hear all about this. This is, again, with so many of these songs, going through the Roud Index in numerical order means that we don't necessarily come to songs that I am very familiar with. And I'd seen the name of this song around, and I'd actually heard Pete and Chris Coe's version, because it's a great album. I've heard that for a few years. But I really wasn't kind of aware of any of that to do with the song and the history. So it's been an education for me, and I hope our listeners, well, if they're listening to this podcast, I assume they like this sort of thing, this sort of in-depth nerdery that we've just spent 90 minutes on. But thank you so much for coming on and doing this and being part of this. This is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I had a great time getting to talk about this. It's an absolutely incredible song, so I really loved this.
It really is. You. Well, it's great, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the podcast at some point. There are plenty of songs that you sing, and so it'd be great to have you on just the singer side of an episode. But then if there are more songs that you have done sort of history on, let's have you on. We did chat about this, I think, at one point, and we've made a list of something, but we'll come to that in the future. But for the time being, though, Nora Rhodes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was on a night and an evening bright, when the dew began to fall. Lady Margaret was walking up and down, looking o'er her castle wall. She looked east, she looked west, to see what she could spy. When a gallant knight came in her sight, unto her gates drew nigh. God mak ye safe and free, fair maid. God mak ye safe free. Oh, what is your will with me, Sir Knight? Oh, what your will with me? My will with ye is nae small lady. My will with ye nae small. And sign there in your power within. You'll hear my secrets on. Oh, I am come to this castle, lady, for the love o' thee. And if ye will nae grant me love, oh, for your sake I'll die. If ye should die for me, Sir Knight, it's frae for ye will mean. For better men hae died for me, was graves are growing green. What is the fleur that I first flew? Take growing muir and dale. Oh, what is the bird, the bonniest bird, sings next the nightingale? What is the colour, the fairest colour, that king or queen can wail? Oh, what is the fleur that I first flew? Take row in muir and dale. The primrose is that I first flew. Take row in muir and dale. The mavis is the bonniest bird, sings next the nightingale. And yellow is the fairest colour, that king or queen can wail. Aye, the primrose is that I first flew. Take row in muir and dale. Ye've o'er ill-washen feet, Margaret, and our ill-washen hands. Ye've to coarser robes on your body, and with me we nae body is buried in dun firm line, safe far ayond the sea. No peace or rest one day I get, for the pride o' thee. Cast off, sister, he said, use it nae ony mair. For when ye hae been where I hae been, ye will repent it sair. They sit in Prairie's chair, Margaret. 'Tis the lowest seat o' hell. And if ye won't amend your ways, it's there that ye maun dwell. With that he vanished from her sight in the twinkling o' an eye. And Nathan mair this lady saw, but the gloomy clouds in the sky.
That was Nora Rhodes singing Proud Lady Margaret. And we heard the recording of Lizzie Higgins in the middle of that chat too. That's the end of this episode, but I do want to take a minute or so to tell you about our Patreon site. Over on Patreon, we cover songs from a lot further on in the Roud index. There are some songs which it would be great to cover, but by the very nature of going through the index in numerical order, we just will never ever reach them. And so our main strand of episodes on Patreon is called Singer's Choice. And it's a chance to have one singer guest on for 3 episodes, and it's their choice of song. So far we've had Singer's Choice mini-seasons from Nancy Kerr, Mossy Christian, Rachel McShane and George Sansom. Also, every year we'll be doing a Carols mini-season too, where we delve into the world of village carols and similar songs. Our other strand is called Spotlight, and it's a chance for us to delve into some subjects other than songs, such as song collectors, traditional singers, and song collecting in different regions or areas of the country. We have 2 subscription tiers, £5 per month and £10 per month. £10 per month will give you access to all of the bonus content, whereas £5 per month will give you access to just some of said bonus content. If you feel so moved to support the podcast financially and receive regular bonus content, then please, Patreon is the way to do it. We are currently in the middle of a Singer's Choice mini-season with special guest Jess Arrowsmith, where we've covered 3 songs chosen by her. Last time we had an episode on Roud 816, A Blacksmith Courted Me, with history from Vic Gammon. This week we have the 3rd and final song chosen by Jess. Along with Vic Gammon again on the history, we'll be looking at the very Devon-specific song Roud 1515, The Bell Ringing. Sign up to hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk, or visit the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you are enjoying the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you would take less than a minute of your time and give the podcast a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. On Apple Podcasts, that's things like a star rating out of 10, out of 5, I think, actually. And also there's a review section as well. On YouTube, there's the like button, the thumbs up button. Please don't press the thumbs down button if you really can help it. And there's a comment section as well. And I think other independent podcast apps have similar systems to either of those two. So, as I said, it really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience and spread the love of folk song nerdery. In the Roud is a media partner to Veteran, the traditional music label. Although this week's song does not currently feature on any of their releases, you can find details of their extensive catalogue on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guest, Nora Rhodes. Join me next week for episode 8 of this season. We will be looking at Roud 38, which is Child Ballad number 49. That's the song The Two Brothers. On the history side, I will be joined by another new historical contributor, Joe Miller, and my singer guest will be Kirsty Law. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.